Hello AP English Language and Composition students. Welcome to Lesson 53, Part 3 of our second multiple choice practice test. Hopefully my explanations will help you understand how to read through and get the most information out of a prose passage. Okay, so this is our third passage, and it is a very scholarly article, if you remember, because it has a lot of research supporting it, serious research, legitimate research, and it's a sociological orientation. So it starts off with a paragraph that tonally doesn't seem to fit the rest of the paragraph, and there's a question about that. So we have references to Humpty Dumpty and Alice in Wonderland and a Chevy Suburban, and it's just kind of casual. Why might that be? The author has chosen to be a little more relaxed in order to open the door for the reader to feel relaxed and to have more comfortability reading the passage. So that is why that's in there, even though it doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the passage. Okay, so what makes a family is our title. That should help us get an understanding. Now, if we are smart readers, we don't have to read for the multiple choice extremely carefully. We only have an hour for usually 5 passages. So you don't want to, it depends on how the quality of reader you are. But I would not worry about catching every detail. No, you can't do that. And sometimes, you can, if you get a little confused, you can read the topic sentences. We get the idea that it's about Romans at this point, and still Romans the next paragraph. But it ends, I won't skip there right now, with a one-sentence paragraph. In other words, until very recently, not love, but biology. I'm sorry, not love, not biology, but labor made a family. So, if you skim around sometimes before you read through more carefully, you might get some clues. So, we get the idea that we're trying to define what a family is. So it's an argument of definition. Starts out historically in ancient Rome, which is part of Europe, and they're only focusing on Europe here for support. So we get the idea that the patriarch's rule was complete. So there was the head of the household, some male was the head of the household, and what counted was ownership, right? So it didn't have to be biology. Family wasn't constituted, thought to be constituted just by blood. And there is a question about that too. And they use the word sanguinity. Sanguinity is from the Latin, and we can get the Latin words through Spanish and French because those are Latin derived. So if you have studied those a little bit, sangre de Cristo, blood of Christ, but sangre in Spanish, or sang, S-A-N-G, in French. So, and sanguine in French means bloody. So if you have some of that background, it is helpful, because the last question on this section is referring to that. So anyway, blood did make family in the ancient Rome. Ownership did. So slaves were, if they're living in your household, they're part of the family too. Now, this is very footnoted, and there's a question about this. A custody battle as vicious as that over baby M. What are footnotes? This one is not your customary footnote. It's a type of a footnote. So before we had works cited pages or bibliography pages, we would cite sources at the bottom of the page with footnotes, but this isn't what this is. It is the same process, but it is adding extra information. That's the case here. The author doesn't think that everyone will understand what she's referring to, so she puts a little extra note. She doesn't want to encumber her page, so she has you look elsewhere for it if you need it. But most footnotes aren't that. They are for the scholars, and they will provide the scholars with something that the Works Cited or bibliography page can't provide, a little more in-depth information about the source without having to look it up too far. So that's what's happening there. There are always questions on the AP test with footnotes, so do know how to understand them, and I will explain them a little more later. All right, so we do have that. Then there is a reference to, well, we have further explanation right here. Romans made no fetish of natural kinship. That means they weren't irrationally devoted. They weren't irrationally devoted to kinship, blood, which I already said, to make a family. The next example is also from Italy, but now we're jumping through time up until the end of the 18th century, the end of the 1700s. And here is an example from Bologna in Italy from the 13th century, where family, this is the atypical example. Mostly family was not blood, but here it was. We have some records from that time that say this is the exception, right? This is an exception. So then we know, hey, the rest of it is all what everyone else thought, that it wasn't blood. So I don't think we have to say too much more about this article. There's not irony in it. There's not anything too strange, except for the first paragraph. But just the last key points. The European family, like the Roman, which is European, but from ancient times to more modern times, the European family included people we'd consider legal strangers that were grouped together in that word family, not by blood, but by whether they lived under one roof. All right, so that's what we're supposed to get from this. But let's look at the footnotes. Okay. So we have some footnotes, and you do need to understand this. Because on the last test I didn't go over that section, that last passage of the first test, which had footnotes. What do we have here? Some excerpt from the article, but this would be an author, this would be a page number. Then we have the second footnote. There's a question about this. Extra information is given here to clarify what was stated in the article. So a little more in detail, in depth for the more scholarly reader. But what we have here is what you would find at the beginning of an entry on a Works Cited page. The author and then a page number. Well, we get this author and the page number, but we also get another author, and that information came not from written documentation, but just the author of this article talking to this person. The problem is we have two sources referring back to this information in this footnote, so we do not know, what part of this information came from this author or what came from that author, right? So there's a question about that, and the answer is depends on having to know what I just told you, that providing two authors causes confusion. But would you have recognized that as two authors? Hopefully. But now you will. Here's that footnote, extra information about Baby M. And that's all they really ask about in this. I don't know, maybe they asked something about footnote 6. So if you want to follow up, they're giving you information. If you wanted to follow it up, they give you more sources that wouldn't be in the Works Cited page or bibliography page. But the author has researched them and knows there's more. So it's for the scholar. So let's go through a few of the questions. But I've already gone through a lot of them by explaining the article itself. So they say, the answer is A for 21. And the first statement was, most historians warn readers that to grasp family history you must first abandon the idea. Well, that also is a paradox. To understand, you have to get rid of. So do know it's a little strange that it starts with a paradox. But, so it says in lines 1 and 2. But it is the first sentence. Most historians warn readers that to grasp family history, you must first abandon the idea that you already know what family means. That's the thesis because it's explaining to the reader that what is going to be upcoming to define family is not what we thought it was. So that's why it's the thesis. Overall, it's a little bit of a surprise throughout the whole article. This is not what we think now, but this is what was thought then. We already know that. I've gone over that. We already know that. The author assumed no one knew, not everyone would know about baby M. Oh, this is helpful for me to go over. The opening sentence of the passage is an example. Yes, I just explained that. To understand, you have to get rid of the information. It's a paradox. C. But you might have picked, sometimes students pick the term they don't know. Ad hoc argument. What is that? It's a Latin term, those first two words. It is the idea that an argument that is made up just for the situation. An argument made just for the situation. It's not like about a common issue that everyone would be aware of. An ad hoc argument is one made just for a particular situation. That's what that is. So, moving on, the tone of the passage, question 26. Well, we know it's scholarly with all the footnotes and serious, that way. But it is conversational in the first paragraph, so that's why it's our answer. But you might wonder about these other words. We don't sense that tone anywhere, but there isn't harshness. That's like really scathing remarks, vituperative. Pedantic, that means overly attentive to detail. Well, you might say that this article is, but it isn't formal in the first paragraph. So, erudite it's scholarly, which this is, but exhortative means I'm trying to compel you, like inspire and compel you, and that's not happening. It's not humorous overall, right? It's not detached. The author is involved. So, it's that. We already know number 27. Lines 33 and 34, historians. Okay, so the question 28 has to do with understanding. These lines refer to the definition of family, that it's universal or not universal. But I guess I should look back at lines 2 through 5. Family seems to be a word invented by Humpty Dumpty, a word that means what I say it means, what I say it should mean, neither more nor less. The question is, which is to be mastered? That is all. Historians have always reminded us of the word's etymology. Okay, so lines 33 and 34 are most parallel to this idea.